it's that rare privilege that happens maybe twice a year these days where I get to see my governance update colleague in real life, in the flesh. There he is again. Stephen Cooper, hello.
Hello, Chris, and no, the privilege and pleasure is mine, I'm sure.
Great to see you. How's your week been?
Pleasure. My week's been good. I've been travelling around rural Victoria, which has been a bit of fun. We might talk about that.
I might ask you about what that's all about. But we're here at Pitcher Partners in Docklands. We've just had a terrific Leading the Agenda session on audit and risk committees. We're going to find out a bit more about that in just a moment. How did you feel it went? We had a great room of really interested people.
Yeah, I won't cut across anything you and Richard might say, but a really engaged group of people and some questions that I didn't see coming.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah, excellent. All right, I might ask you off camera what those questions were, but I did take some time after the session to speak with one of the panellists, Richard Wilson from Pitcher Partners, about some of his observations of the discussion. Richard Wilson is a senior manager at Pitcher Partners and was one of the members of our panel today at the Leading the Agenda Forum on audit and risk committees. Richard, thank you for being part of that. It was a great discussion, I thought.
No, it was a really great opportunity to really, I suppose, engage with the council community and actually hear what people are really interested in, as well as what challenges they've got. And I think that was really, it was probably comforting that there were people out there desiring to ask questions. And I think that thirst for knowledge is very apparent.
Well, it was great to have your internal audit background, but also the breadth of experience you've got across the public sector and the private sector, and we had some of that as well from the other panellists. Given where the conversation went, did anything surprise you about the questions that came then from the audience?
Look, certainly, questions about being confronted with so much information wasn't surprising, I've got to admit, but certainly it just highlighted sort of the need for some form of method that people can actually understand these audit and risk committee papers and meetings and knowing where to go. I think there's probably a heightened need for training, I think, around audit and risk committee itself. And I think certainly the feedback about the integrity piece came through a little bit, not surprising. And I think certainly there are people in positions where they're probably feeling slightly challenged as to how they deal with situations and what forums they should bring their concerns to.
Yeah, some of the questions sort of spoke to me as still a bit of a lack of understanding of the role and how do I make the most of this opportunity to be part of the assurance process? How far can I go, I guess, and what are the good questions to be asking? Yeah,
and look, I think probably one of the things we did talk about was ask questions, so that should be number one rule. I think certainly, particularly for new members who may not be risk professionals, it's always good to lean on your chair and independent members. They've done it for a while, and generally that's a really good way of getting some insight and some balance as to what questions to ask where.
Are you starting to see a change in the typical makeup of the independent member cohort on audit and risk committees?
It's a really good question, Chris, because obviously in the last round of elections, seeing the old to the new. Look, there's certainly some, in terms of business credentials, IT backgrounds. So you're seeing some people who have a particular skill, from a councillor perspective I'm talking, who can bring that to the table. Whereas perhaps historically there was a reliance on perhaps the independents to bring that level of skill. Yeah,
and you made the point in the discussion about making sure that that breadth of experience from different walks of life is actually allowed to flow through to that audit consideration process.
Absolutely. So look, in terms of, I suppose each audit committee member, councillor member, knowing what they're bringing to the table, and I think that's a really important thing to understand, and if they're not sure they should ask, because I think that then allows perhaps more confidence on their part to contribute and to ask questions.
Terrific. So, Richard, I know the VLGA would like me to express thanks to you and your team at Picture Partners for making the venue available and for being such a strong supporter of the Leading the Agenda program. There was just such a sense in the room of people just happy to be out at an in-person event again, and to be able to have it at your venue was just really appreciated.
No, our pleasure, always, anytime, I'd say. But certainly, from my perspective, I also found it great too.
Yeah.
From a face-to-face, actually engaging with people once again. It makes the whole, I suppose, purpose a lot clearer.
Yeah. Thank you. I look forward to seeing you across the table at an audit committee meeting somewhere around metropolitan Melbourne in the not too distant future.
Absolutely, Chris. Thank you.
Richard Wilson there from Picture Partners. Great to speak with him about the session, and I think his observations probably match ours pretty much. There's a level of complexity and an ongoing challenge to understand what the process is all about.
Hundreds of pages, but it was a really nice reminder about helping particularly those councillor members of audit and risk committees to use the reports to actually filter the information rather than feeling they've got to read each of the 500 pages.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Steve, can you remember when you worked in councils, that time of the year where you're just waiting for the latest community satisfaction survey results to drop?
Oh, with bated breath, Chris. Oh, don't tell me it's that time of year again.
It is that time of year. I've noticed a few press releases coming from councils who have been quite proactive to put their results out there to their communities, and the Minister has made an announcement that the survey's been completed for this year with 66 councils participating and a minimum of 400 interviews undertaken for each council. That doesn't mean the other 13 haven't done one, but they've probably done their own.
They've done their own. They haven't used the standard one, or the Local Government Victoria auspiced one, presumably for sound reasons.
Yes, and look, I've had experience with some councils that prefer to use a different provider because they might want to hone in on, particular questions or areas of concern for their community to get a read on what people think about that. But I think 66 is pretty high, actually.
66 is pretty good. And 400 responses per council, that would give you a reasonably high confidence level in terms of the results that are received. I think always, Chris, the challenge is how do you use data like that as part of a suite of balanced scorecard indicators that's not only about satisfaction but also efficiency, effectiveness, some sort of rate of improvement to actually really drive performance improvement in your councils.
In terms of the community plan or the council plan process, I mean, some have already adopted, some are just about there, and of course they have to have them in place by October. You wouldn't really want to be sitting back waiting on these results to inform your council plan, I guess, would you?
I wouldn't have thought so. I mean, I think the council plan is about designing the strategy. You would know what indicators you might use along the way in your council plan to determine your success or otherwise. My tendency as a rule, Chris, is to think that the more highly strategic the indicator, the more likely it is that you are going to also need to track data over time. That 1 year might, if an indicator is really important to you, because there might be some just natural variation, there might be a circumstance that causes the rate to go up or down, you really need to look at trend data. And I guess that was really going back to my point about some of those councils that might be using a different data set for the council plan purposes.
What do you think about the tendency perhaps of some media outlets to go for what I think is a pretty easy, lazy story, the league table, comparing one council's result to another? It's really not an apples to apples process.
Look, it's hopeless, Chris. And there's so many variables in terms of where the councils come from, what historically the community expectations been, what the media might say. I think it should be just every council needs to look at that data on its own. I know there's always a bit of a debate about league tables, but let me just say I'm not a fan.
And you're not alone.
There you go.
We'll put up a link, in fact it's probably over my face right now, to the page where you can find out more about the 2021 community surveys as released by Local Government Victoria. So you mentioned you've been up country, as I like to say. You've been talking ethics and governance with some council teams. How's that been going?
A really good reminder, I suppose, Chris, of the challenges that are faced by local government staff in small towns in avoiding conflicts of interest. That, of course, council staff should be involved in local community groups, but from a conflict of interest point of view, that creates its issues. They have family members who are employed by suppliers to the council, and the Local Government Act has now become very clear about that in terms of perceptions of conflict of interest. So a real reminder to me of the importance for council staff, particularly in this context, because it was a staff group, if in doubt, declare. And then for leadership, management, the executive, being well positioned to make a determination as to the materiality of the conflict and the means by which it will be managed.
I think it's great to hear that some councils are doing that level of training and awareness with staff, because my sense is that probably isn't the normal approach.
It's not as normal as perhaps it should be, Chris.
Yeah.
Look, I think too, if we look at a range of integrity and behaviour kind of issues, like any of the textbooks say, it starts with training people. A fair, reasonable organisation gives people the best chance of compliance rather than waiting for non-compliance and then being punitive.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great investment.
Excellent. All right, well done on that. We've got a little bit of CEO news this week. We do.
Oh, good.
We'd like to keep up on those movements, and of course there is a list on the Local Government News Roundup website of Victorian Council CEO movements since the start of this council term. So the latest is, sadly for the Southern Grampians Shire community, Michael Tudball has resigned.
That's, really good operator, Michael Tudball, can I say?
You can.
At the risk of editorialising.
And you'd be correct.
Can I editorialise a bit further, Chris?
Yes.
And it's not about Michael or Southern Grampians Shire, but it does point to an issue for local government generally of attracting and retaining quality CEOs inside the sector. And if we're talking about performance indicators for councils generally, whether our CEOs are able to continue their careers within local governments, I think a really important indicator.
So the missing piece of the puzzle there that people might not be aware of is Michael is going to a role within the state government in the Department of Transport in southwest Victoria. So you're right, being lost to the sector, which is a shame, but good luck to him for obviously taking on a role that he's really keen on.
Yeah, state government, otherwise known as our competitors in the CEO employment market.
Indeed. There have been a few, haven't there, in recent years. Well, we wish Michael all the best. We're waiting to hear about interim and recruitment arrangements, and my mail has it that we might have one or two more announcements in the very near future on the CEO front.
Are you saying imminent, Chris?
I am saying imminent, yes, I am. Maybe we'll have something to talk about next week. I think that's all we've got for our special edition from Picture Partners. Steve?
Except I just wonder, Chris, if you've had a recent score on the registrations for the International Panel on Child-Friendly Cities on 15th of July.
What a very good question. Guess who forgot to mention the global panel coming up on the 15th of July. We're well over 100 in terms of registered attendees, and we're a week out. And I've got to say there's been a bit of a race going on, an Australian versus UK race, because there's lots of UK interest and attendance for this event.
Well, I think last week, Chris, we talked about asserting our Antipodean independence.
I think we're in front now. I do think we're in front, but it's been a very healthy rivalry watching those numbers go up.
Oh, and more importantly too, Chris, it'll be a great panel, because whilst it's about child-friendly cities, it is also about how we do business, what's important to us as civil societies, and where we go to in the future. So I'm looking forward to it.
I'm very pleased that there's a big football, as in round ball, game happening Monday morning our time. I'm very pleased that there's about 3.5 days between that occurring and our global panel, because I've got a feeling if England wins, we're not going to get much sense out of people.
No,
they for a while.
They all think that football's coming home.
Indeed, and good luck to them as well. So that's the global panel on child-friendly cities and communities, with a focus on the impact of COVID on children and young people. We've got Liana Buchanan, the Commissioner for Children and Young People. We've got Angela Scott, who's the CEO of Aberdeen City Council in Scotland, of course, where they're one of the very few, in fact one of the first, I think, to really sign on to the UN Convention for Children's Rights. We'll talk about what that actually means, and I think that's something that you're going to see a lot more of, particularly with councils in the UK. And Dr. Vivian Romero from Central Queensland University, who's a public health lecturer, has done quite a lot of interesting research into the impacts of COVID on families and children particularly.
Be good.
Thanks, Steve. Look forward to that. Look forward to the governance update next week. Happy tripping around the state, and we'll see you again very soon.
And you too. Thanks, Chris.
That's Steve Cooper. He's the Chief of Staff at the VLGA, and there's your governance update for another week. Thanks for your company. Thanks again to Picture Partners for hosting us today, and we'll see you again soon.